1867 Sports Show coming at you with a special guest appearance. Today, we are happy to be joined by host of the Sens Nation podcast and the Steve Warne Project, Mr. Steve Warne himself. How are you doing today?
Gentlemen, nice to be here. Thank you. Doing great. How about you?
Well, I would love to say that we're going to be breaking down the thick of a playoff race. Look at the Sens go. But in the immortal words of Bill Murray, well, it's Groundhog Day again.
It really is. I mean, it just feels like once again, the second half of the season is just going to be one long extended preseason evaluating and getting ready for the following year. And it's unfortunate. It just, the last 2 years, I went into the regular season going, man, this is going to be their year. This is the year they turn it around and they do exactly what they did the previous years. So yeah, the Groundhog Day reference is absolutely perfect.
And now you two both know the plight of the Edmonton Oilers fan of the 90s and early 2000s before the Connor McDavid era. So you're welcome that you can now share in my my previous pain.
Yeah, you get to just sit over there sitting pretty. You're busting off 16-game heaters and
Cousin Stu's just working the net. You know, it's a good time to be an Oilers fan. Let me just say that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, lots to talk about in Ottawa Senators land. And, Big Kyle being an Oilers fan, he gets to kind of sit back and throw some opinions from the cheap seats here. So we figured we would try something a little bit different and just kind of do a this or that, where Kyle's going to throw us out some topics that he, as a Oilers fan, has observed. He's kind of picked up on some headlines, but and then Steve, you and I can kind of just go back and forth as far as our thoughts on our beloved Senators season, which seems to just be mirroring the last three. So we'll throw it over to the I don't know if we're gonna say bearded Vanna White, Pat Sajak. What kind of vibes are you throwing off today right now, Kyle?
Well, you're always mentioning Big Kyle, Little Kyle. I think the better way to describe the two of us is beardy and baldy. Yeah. That's probably the best way. But okay. But before we dive in again, Steve, great to have you on. Listened to you for years, obviously on the radio and your podcast. So definitely interested to hear your thoughts and opinions on the 1867 Sports Show today. But as Kyle mentioned before, we're going to dive into a little bit of Q&A just with two Senators fanatics and just kind of see where the team can turn it around, because from afar, it's not good. Obviously, it's not good where the Senators are. They're kind of in that purgatory of, all right, optimism for the first month, and then after that first month, it just goes into, okay, well, reloading. It's reloading.
It's the classic November swoon that we've become synonymous for here in Senators land.
It's the pre-Christmas letdown, as we call it. But anyways, we'll start it off because obviously, they're sitting in the bottom of the Atlantic Division once again. Their fifth worst record in the league once again. So maybe we'll just get some opinions going on. The first thing, like the difference is they obviously made that coaching change, very recently. Between you two guys, what are you seeing in the differences between Jacques Martin and DJ Smith's systems?
Wow, that's an interesting one. I mean, it's I can't say that I've picked up on anything noticeable, as in like they've changed up their forecheck from a 1-2-2 to a 2-1-2 or something like that. I do think that it's pretty clear that there is an emphasis from Jacques Martin to not take shortcuts. I was talking to Drake Batherson about that this week, and he thinks about his plus minus in the last couple of years. He's got it down to a -6, which is pretty reasonable. But he talked about how everybody on the team right now is thinking more about the greater good, the defensive team tactics, and I think with that Anaheim-Chicago mix, notwithstanding, over the last little while in the second half of Jacques Martin's tenure here, I do see a team that's a little more, what's the word I'm looking for? They're just a little more focused on the defensive side of things, not cheating, not having their brain turned to the off position and puck watching and the D zone coverage while something's going on behind them and a guy's coming loose and they're not picking up the man. I am seeing a little more of that. Systems wise, I don't think I've seen anything dramatically different. Just the commitment to, and we've heard this, it's almost becoming trite and cliche hearing it, those defensive details. that Jacques Martin is famous for. I do see a little more on that front.
Yeah, and like Steve was saying there, I don't think there's been any drastic changes, nor should fans have thought that, Martin was going to walk in there and suddenly be the savior and they're going to go on a Hamburglar-esque run and all of a sudden, they're playoff contenders. But, the one thing I've kind of noticed is, and you've even seen it in little clips there, whether it's Alfie or Martin on the bench there, the emphasis on shorter shifts, right? Where if they get a chance to change after 20, 30 seconds, they're kind of chewing some guys out for going out there for minute plus long skates. And that obviously has an effect when the puck does go into their own end, whether they've got the energy to do those little detail things correctly and all of that. So that's one change I've noticed. But really, by and large, this team has so much that they still need to work on from a system standpoint. It's tough to implement those types of things mid-season when you've already been operating with a certain type of play or a certain philosophy for not just a couple weeks, but several years, right? Like DJ Smith was in that position for several seasons, and some of those, let's say, bad habits are kind of ingrained in guys. So to expect Martin to go in there and magically undo years worth of coaching overnight isn't really realistic. So it'll be interesting to see, this latter half of the season, if after now having a few weeks and a month plus of Martin at the bench there, whether his philosophy starts to take over a little bit more and we start seeing some of those kind of old school quick shifts, pucks in deep, defensive responsibility above all else. Well, one player I can kind of highlight there who's maybe taken it very seriously, almost to an offensive detriment, has been Stützle of late, where you look at his production last year, where you're going out there and putting up 90 points as a 21-year-old. He's still almost a point per game player, right? But I think the 12 goals this season is a bit of a drop off from what fans thought. It was just going to be this rocket ship to the moon here. Like, look at this offensive talent that we've got, and maybe he's regressing. Well, yeah, that's going to happen when you want to get a more complete two-way player who's going to do the right things in his own end and still give you the opportunities to bury the puck at the opposite end.
Well, I was just going to say the Jacques Martin, it's been basically a bad habits boot camp, and and Kyle, small Kyle? What did we decide on?
I thought we were calling him Baldy.
Baldy, right? I don't know if he's happy with that. I don't know if I'm comfortable.
We'll have a referendum on this after the show here.
But I like that. Just it is boot camp from a perspective. We're really taking it back to the basics, and that was a good point about the line changes, because when you're, and it's not just about I'm tired out there. People will say things like that was a lazy back check or something like that, because the reality is you decided you would go, maybe it's a 2-on-2 or something. You decided you go and try for a scoring chance instead of dumping it in and getting off the ice. So it's just little things like that create bigger problems, bigger picture things that, people say, again, why didn't he back check there? Is he lazy or something? No, because he decided to forego the opportunity to get off the ice 30 seconds earlier. So little things like that, I think, are what Jacques Martin is all about. I think, when you talk about DJ Smith and his time with the Ottawa Senators, he was, I think, a motivator and a communicator and a raw guy. I don't know that I'm sure he talked about those things, but it sure didn't seem like he held them particularly accountable in a meaningful way.
Yeah. The old X's and O's versus Jimmy and Joe's there. There's always more than one way to skin a cat, and Kyle's nodding in the background because that's one of his favorite throw-to comments there, but mostly on the football side of things.
My wife would hate that. She loves cats.
No, not the cat one, the Jimmy's and Joe's part. But
okay, gotcha.
Yeah, but yeah, I was just gonna say, Kyle's, I'm starting to rub off on him a little bit. He's using some of my mannerisms now. It's good, but you guys are, you're talking about Jacques Martin coming in and kind of giving back that old school mentality, that, the fundamental boot camp, so to speak. Does this kind of show that maybe he deserves a little bit more time behind the bench? Obviously he's got a small sample size now, but given his past success with the franchise and obviously the incredible work he's done as an assistant coach with some Stanley Cup winning teams, do you think that this is the type of team that he deserves the chance to be behind the bench of long term?
I think if he goes out and he does something Hamburglar-esque and does something crazy, and the team's competing for a playoff spot or getting to a playoff spot, and he wants to come back, then he's absolutely got to come back. But I think that the organization right now is looking at more as Jacques Martin clinic. Just that's what this is about. And to hear Steve Staios's midseason address, if you listen to it and read between the lines, Steve Staios does not have Jacques Martin on his list of potential coaching candidates for this fall. I think that's a 99% certainty, barring some miracle comeback. I don't know if anybody's even asked the question, fellas, if Jacques Martin actually wants to continue this at age 71. I had a chance to chat with Jacques at practice a few days ago, and I didn't get too much into it with it. It was just more social talk. I was reminded what a gentleman he is, and what a great guy he's been for this organization. For him to step in at 71 like this has been fantastic, but it's a grind. I mean, even the guys in their 20s that are doing the travel and go. It's not an easy deal, and so I don't know if he wants to come back or not, but it would take something awful special down the stretch, in my opinion, before this organization would even consider that. I think they're in full on look for a new coach mode, and I don't think Jacques Martin will be behind this bench this fall.
Yeah, and I'm kind of the same opinion there as well too. If he wants to come back, you know what? I would have absolutely no problem with him being in some sort of advisory position, or they carve out a role for him within the organization. Because, as you said, right, he's done a lot of heavy lifting for this club over a large period of time. So if the want is there, but maybe it's as he alluded to, kind of a travel thing, like, hey, 41 away games per season, at 71, that's going to be tough on anyone. But if he wants to stick around in some sort of lesser capacity, I would have absolutely no problem with that. But I would be pretty shocked if, even if they do go on a bit of a heater down the stretch, if he's the long-term fit, just given his age, just given kind of the comments that management has made in the past. It's kind of been non-committal. It does kind of give off that almost like summer camp, boot camp you alluded to there vibes, where he's going to come in, he's got a job to do, he's got to try and change the culture a little bit, but he's just a steady hand on the wheel right now as they look for that kind of longer term fit. And I mean, you've seen some names bounced around. Obviously, there was I don't know whether it was a false sighting or just internet rumor of, oh, Patrick Waugh was in Canada, a few weeks ago prior to taking the Islanders job. But you've seen some fairly large names tied to that position potentially in, Berube and Claude Julien. And I tend to think that they're probably going to look at getting kind of a long-term fit in that veteran coach mold. Like, I would be pretty shocked if they brought in kind of a young up-and-comer. I think DJ Smith was very much that, fun uncle kind of personality and would be a great guy to have a beer with, but his time had come up with the organization. He got them through kind of those lean years, but getting them over the hump is an entirely different beast altogether. So I would venture a guess they're probably going to go on more of a grizzled vet behind the bench, whoever that does end up being.
Yeah, I'd wonder if it's even fixable, though, by a new coach without making some significant changes. What Steve Staios has to figure out here as he decides on the next coach is this just a group of kids that, with the right coaching, development, getting rid of bad habits, that the new coach can come in and be successful? Or are some of these guys, are there big weaknesses in the roster? For me, I think there's too much of one thing. There's a surplus of the skilled, non-physical player, as I kind of call it, the soft skill. This team needs more hard skill. Guys who come in who play a nasty style, guys who come in who are really responsible on both sides of the puck, and it just, just hard to play against. I think when I think back to Nathan McKinnon and his 4-goal performance back earlier in the season, he actually said it was easy. I mean, that's humiliating almost.
Yeah.
And so that's the question Steve Staios has here as he, heads toward the trade deadline, and as he figures out a new head coach. How much change does this roster need? Is it just a case of this new coach is going to come in and be successful with these guys, giving them a little more time, or does he really have to do some big things?
Yeah, and I think, given Steve Staios's previous career as a player and obviously working his way up in the management side of things, he's been involved in a lot of those different organizations where he's not only been a gritty player, but he's been around a lot of those types of individuals. So I think identifying that type of player, that type of coach is going to work well with that type of player is probably it's not going to be easy, but it's going to be a little bit easier for him than it would someone else who's coming into this with a different background. So I think from that perspective, they probably have the right guy in place. But, given everything you guys are saying, I mean, who are some candidates that you think would be a good fit with this roster? And, what's the expectation for them coming in outside of results on the ice?
Well, I think it's all results based. So that's a tough one to just throw out of the discussion. But I think Craig Berube would be my number one candidate right now. I guess my only red flag would be, why aren't you hiring him right now and giving him the rest of the season to get a feel for these guys and what they're about? But I still think he would be the guy I'd bet on at this stage of the game, because he's won a Stanley Cup, because he's also a 6-year teammate and friend of Dave Poulin, who's Steve Staios' right-hand man. So he'd be a guy I'd definitely put at the top of my list right now, and I think it would be a good choice for the organization. There's the usual suspects of guys floating around out there that we could list off here who've recently lost their positions. I don't know what you think of your Jay Woodcroft after he got fired early in the year, but he's done what no Senator coach has done in the last little while, and that's take the team into the playoffs and win a round. And so, and he's pretty well regarded, pretty well liked guy. I don't know why things went so sideways so quickly there, but he's a guy that's out there. Dean Evason's another name that's out there, who's had great success. You look at Berube's success level and Evason's success level, and I'm sure you guys would agree. We're watching those guys get fired with their recent track records in the regular season. Like, we're talking, Stanley Cup wins, and in Evason's case, a lot of top fives in the regular season, not a lot of playoff success. But compared to DJ Smith and what he was doing in Ottawa, that guy kept his job while those guys are getting fired. Anyway, in answer to your question, there's lots of guys out there. I don't know that there's anybody better than Craig Berube, in my opinion.
Yeah, and the timing of it was always so strange to me as well, too, right? Like, number one, I was shocked if new ownership's coming in that they don't just clear house immediately. So they kind of let it drag into the season to begin with, which, okay, whatever. The whole feeling out process, we're not, leaving any stone unturned. All right, that's great. But if you're going to make a change, which by and large, I think you would be hard pressed to find a Senators fan who thought DJ Smith's the long-term answer. He's going to guide us to a Stanley Cup championship.
What are you talking about? You've been so glowing in your critiques of him.
Yeah. But like you'd be hard pressed to find that type of person who would give him that glowing endorsement. So if you were ever going to make a change, like the Sweden trip to me seemed like the ideal time to make it. You want to see a bunch of guys bond and get, under a new system real quick. Throw them out of their comfort zone. Throw them into a different country here. Hey, let's go out there and, we're going to make the change. And then they had some time off afterwards to get some systems in place and whatnot. So the timing of everything was strange, but I agree. I would be thrilled if, a Craig Berube came in there, and, there's some pretty big name coaches out there who have that playoff experience and know how to get teams over the hump that I think would fit in fairly seamlessly with the roster. Now, the question is, how much of that roster, when the new front office and all of that really takes a hard look at it, is still going to be around come fall, 2024.
Yeah, I would say to, first of all, that Swedish trip, can we stop going? Can we stop putting the Ottawa Senators over in Sweden? That thing just
it's their one time a year where they actually get wins, though.
Yeah, but they come back and they're garbage for so long. It's like I don't know, maybe they party it up too hard in Sweden. I don't know, but I think at this stage of the game, Michael Andlauer should go ahead and say no more Swedish trips. But I think it's a mistake that they made by not replacing DJ Smith earlier, but I don't blame them for it. It's a weird thing to say. I think the decision to hang on and see what DJ Smith was all about was born from professionalism. I think Michael Andlauer and his group, they keep saying it, best in class. And to come in and just willy-nilly blow out the coach after a tough first month, you don't know him from a hole in the wall, you just got here, that would be like the volatility of the Melnick years. So while it was a mistake, I think it was born in professionalism. And the same is true with hiring Jacques Martin and really doing the due diligence, not leaving any stone unturned when it comes to the next coach. So I think that you might make an argument for Craig Berube. Why aren't you hiring him right now? Because they want to see what's going on. They want to see, so I think that while I think that was a mistake by not going to Jacques Martin earlier, might have salvaged the season, kept them in the playoff race. I think it was born from professionalism.
Yeah. And, maybe it was born from this franchise has a history of gassing their head coaches, a lot easier than other teams do, right? So maybe it was, we don't want to set the precedent that things are going to be the same from the Melnick years, because we were going through so much turnover year after year after year with our coaching staff. Let's just try and get a little continuity. Maybe they can dig themselves out of the hole. But yeah, I think it just got to the point where, okay, obviously this has gone on too much under the DJ Smith term. We need to make a fresh start here. And, to your point, Steve, let's just do this professionally and do it, maybe more slowly and more educated than in years past. So, but to that point, Kyle, you had mentioned, who's going to be on this roster, come time for this new coach to take over once this management team has time to look over the current state of the team. I mean, there's some contracts that on there that maybe, raise a few eyebrows. So whose contract ultimately worries you guys the most on this team out of these three? Thomas Chabot, Josh Norris, Jonas Korpisalo.
Me, it's a fairly easy one. In Korpisalo, that contract stands out the most based on the results that have been produced to date. Now, you can easily make the argument that Chabot at $8 million per season isn't playing like an $8 million per season defender out there. But you've also seen some small stretches where it's at least serviceable, right? Like you throw out the Anaheim game, which was a debacle for not just Chabot, but quite a few players. You throw out the Chicago game there as well, too. He had put together a nice little stretch of 10 games where you could see something. Now, is that worth $8 million a season? Probably not. But at the end of the day, there's still an NHL defenseman there. What they're getting out of Korpisalo right now is not only well below league average, but is virtually unplayable. Like when you're out shooting your opponents by 20 plus here, and you can't even get 20 saves, which, but you would have to go back to like the early 90s, like lockdown New Jersey Devils defense there to get games where there's only 20 to 25 shots on goal. It's easily 30 plus. So to expect 20 saves out of your goaltender is essentially, house league at this point. And he cannot get there. The Senators, and then there was a fun stat, and it was from Everyday Sens that they put out the other day. So shout out to that little blog. But the Senators are 18-3-1 when their goaltender makes 900 or better save percentage. So all we need is 9 out of 10 saves, and they're an absolute wagon. So to me, it's Korpisalo, just because guess what? You've got so much term left on that as well too. And maybe you can entice someone to maybe try and take that on, but that's really not going to be movable for a good long while. And then you're getting into all right, we're back to Matt Murray 2.0, where we're going to have all this money on the books because we bought him out and whatever. So to me, it's Korpisalo, but there's an argument to be made for all three of them, I think.
Yeah, I think nobody's looking at those three contracts and saying, yeah, that's looking good long term. But it's a small window. You can make excuses for all three of them. I would say this about goaltending. Goaltending is a bit of voodoo. I coached minor hockey for a long time. I always made sure somebody else was picking my goalies for me because I didn't know jack squat about it. The eyeball test, says Korpisalo is not playing particularly well. But we also see scenarios where, show me a great goalie and I'll show you a great defense playing in front of him, and vice versa. If you're bad, your defense is probably bad. I'll use Anthony Stolarz with the Anaheim Ducks. Look at what he did last year with Anaheim. Mm-hmm. He was junk. His stats were garbage. Now he happens to play for the Florida Panthers. Last year was with the Ducks, the worst team in the NHL. This year he's with the number 2 seeded Florida Panthers. Go look at his stats and tell me that that's the same goaltender. Well, it is. He's just playing in front of or behind better defense. So if I have to pick from one of those three, my goalie is going to be my third best option there, or my third pick, just because it is very possible and we saw it with LA. He played very well down the stretch with the LA Kings, who were playing a lot more stable defense than the Ottawa Senators were, and he got to the playoffs, and I think he played in every playoff game for the Kings in their first round loss. So he's number 3 for me. Number 1 by far is Thomas Chabot. Just having seen this guy for a long enough stretch, I see a defender, and if the Ottawa Senators have the puck, got no problem with the guy. If they don't have the puck, I don't know what there is to like about the player. Like, he doesn't play with any level of defense. He stick checks on every opportunity, and his lack of urgency is appalling, like consistently. So when he's got the puck, he can do some great things. But you've got enough puck movers on this team. You've got a surplus of them, particularly on the left side. So if I had to decide between, whether you want Chychrun, Sanderson, Brandstrom, they're all making now you got Sanderson making more money as of this fall. But the bottom line is, I think you've got a surplus of that type of player. So ask me about those 3. It's Thomas Chabot, easy.
Yeah. And it really is, pick your poison here, because there's an argument to be made for all of them there. You even look at Josh Norris, like, talk about handing out a contract at the worst possible time based on future results there, right? Like, he goes out in 2021-22 and he's got 35 goals, and we're thinking, oh my God, is this guy going to be a perennial 30 to 40 goal scorer? Like, did we stumble into lightning in a jar here? And just the injuries have really caught up to him, and he's now kind of slotting into more of that. All right, he's a complimentary role, but I don't know if he's a line driver on a top line anymore, right? And there's very much a case where come next fall, Pinto might even be ahead of him on the depth chart, and now he's a third line center making nearly $8 million a season. So it's worrisome no matter how you split it between those 3. I think my decision to go with Korpisalo here is it's like the Monty Hall, what's behind the door there. You're always wondering, if they just got league average goaltending, what does this team look like? It's something that in Ottawa, right? Like, we just don't have it. We've never really had it, right? Craig Anderson being the kind of lone exception of kind of a sustained period where you had a reliable netminder in there. Ottawa's goaltending, room has just been a graveyard wasteland over the last, 2 decades plus.
Yeah, we know that the previous regime wasn't very good at attracting goaltenders. That was just, whether you want Matt Murray or, they brought in Cam Talbot, and I think they set a record last year or close to the record for most goalies starting in a single game. So, yeah, the previous regime wasn't real good at it. I reserve the right to change that opinion just based on when the defense gets better. Maybe a lot of these goalies along the way would have been better too. Looking at Philip Gustafson, when he left here, he was junk. Mm-hmm. He goes to Minnesota. He had a monster year. Kind of riding the ship now, though. He's not, he's not as elite as he was. But the bottom line is, I think about Josh Norris and your comments about him, Kyle. I feel like, I would even throw Ridley Gregg into the mix when you're looking at this fall, because there's a guy that's starting to feel it. He plays the game. He brings an element that's in short supply. After Brady Tkachuk and Ridley Gregg, how much feistiness do they actually have up front? You could make an argument that Josh Norris is like Thomas Chabot. He's a nice player, don't get me wrong, but they have a surplus of that. I don't know that, he certainly should be in that category, in those 3 guys that you wonder if maybe, you would want to turn the page on them, and not just because you're sick of them or something like that, but because you have too much of that element. In the cases of Chabot and Norris, now you can flip them into something where you're at a deficit, whether that's veteran leadership, whether that's better defending, whatever it is, or a goalie. You can always just flip these guys. And right now, I feel like on the roster, as Steve Staios examines it, he's got too much of a certain element, and he can use that to bring in stuff he needs.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and 2 points before we move on to the next one. First of all, Kyle, I heard Jack Campbell's available for the right price. So feel free to call Steve and tell him to make an offer for Bakersfield's finest.
Soupy.
And Steve, to your point, I mean, you mentioned Ridley Gregg, and no one scores a better empty net goal than Ridley Gregg.
Yeah.
It was the best thing. I was that's honestly, that's in the discussion with Daniel Offertson's perfect, super clean, legal hit on Darcy Tucker in the playoffs. Like that's right in there with the Battle of Ontario lore among things that the Sens fans absolutely love. And I'd also throw in McGrattan breaking Ty Domi's nose. That's in there too.
Yeah,
the Mount Rushmore of Battle of Ontario.
Exactly.
So we're mentioning, what the future regime, what the current regime has to evaluate for the future. Let's take a step back and let's do our own evaluation of the previous regime, kind of where the team is now based on the moves that they made. Given the hindsight you've got, what would you give the Pierre Dorion era as a letter grade?
Ooh, a letter grade. I would say, yeah, because you have to have the extenuating circumstances in there, because he's a rookie and they hire, he learned a little bit from Brian Murray in the time with him. So I'm sure he gleaned a lot of information and education out of him. But I've always had a soft spot for Pierre from the perspective of what would it be like to have Eugene Melnyk over your shoulder every single freaking day of your professional life? Like that guy was, I think that was uniquely an awful boss to work for.
Yep.
We've heard stories again and again. We don't need to dredge them up. We know what kind of person Eugene Melnyk was to work for. He must have been, and I feel at his heart, and I saw it personally on a number of occasions, including at Bert's Bar down in Barbados. Saw it firsthand about what a massive hockey fan Eugene Melnyk was, how volatile he was, and I believe that a lot of the things that happened with this organization where we kind of scratch our head, I believe Eugene Melnyk had direct hands-on influence on that. And so I would probably roll in with Pierre Dorion with a B or a C, just based on how difficult it was to do the things you want to do as a professional manager in the National Hockey League with that guy looking over your shoulder.
Yeah. And, it's been kind of described as having handcuffs on, and, there's been all sorts of euphemisms and analogies thrown out over the years there. But to your point, it really is kind of playing with half a deck of cards there. I'm sure there were a lot of opportunities that probably came forward where Melnyk ultimately shut them down for whatever reason, right? So even from a hockey ops standpoint, did he accomplish everything he wanted to do? And even the things he did want to do and got across the finish line, how much, kind of came down to, well, we could have had this, but it would have cost X amount of money. And, Eugene wanted to run the Senators like a business rather than as kind of a, billionaire's play toy, which most owners kind of use professional sports franchises as. So if you look at it from just a strictly hockey moves standpoint, he would probably score much lower, right? But with the full picture in there, I'd probably give him somewhere around a C, where you got to take the good with the bad, right? I think the Carlson trade, obviously a huge one for Dorian there, signing Tim Stützle to what will eventually look like an absolute steal of a contract. And, if he continues on his current trajectory that he's on right now, little bit of a swoon notwithstanding right now offensively, I think that'll look really good. But there were, as you say, quite a few questionable signings, quite a few swings and misses, quite a few, why was this even on your radar as a priority, right? You look at the Zibanejad trade, you look at bringing in Matt Murray, the constant revolving door of aging veterans that you didn't have to be a really brilliant hockey mind to be like, well, that guy has visibly lost a step or two. Why are we bringing them in here to, you know, instill good habits to our young players when they're probably going to be the cause of quite a few goals against out there? So there's quite a few you can point to, and the biggest one obviously is the Evgeny Dadonov trade, which is pretty damning in and of itself. They're not disclosing obviously the no movement clause, and ultimately going to cost them a first round pick, which again, you look at the comments and Lauer made as far as, hey, this wasn't disclosed to me. at any point during the sale process, and would have been good to know that, hey, this investigation was going on. And oh, by the way, we've got an investigation going on regarding Shane Pinto. And like all of these things were happening in the background, but he was kind of shielded from it in that
Yeah.
sales process.
Yeah.
So it's there's definitely some bad, and regardless of whether you've got a crappy manager or not, there's some of that Dorion needs to wear. But I will give him the benefit of the doubt that I think there was more fingers on the scale behind the scenes than people might realize.
Yeah. I think if we're in the critical mode, I think to add to everything you just said, things just as a workplace, I think it became a little cloak and dagger. I think it became a little paranoid, and it wasn't going well from a leadership standpoint. In terms of a manager of people on top of that. But again, I liken it to the goalie reference I had just a moment ago. If the goaltending doesn't have great defense in front of him, it's just not going to work out. If a manager has an owner who's doing the things that Eugene Melnyk was doing in the background, I'm going to excuse that manager for quite a lot. So yeah, he definitely does deserve to wear some. But as with the goaltending situation, is there any goalie in the NHL, whoever you think the best goalie in the NHL is, if you stick him with the Ottawa Senators the last 5 years, is he really rocking the big numbers, winning Vezina trophies? I don't think so. And I think the same is true. Whoever you think the best GM in the NHL is, you fire him, into the Ottawa Senators chair with Eugene Melnyk filling up his phone with "What's wrong with you?" That kind of thing. Go get that guy. I'm not paying for that guy. Then I'll show you a general manager who's no longer regarded as one of the best general managers in the NHL.
Yeah, and I think to echo some of your statements, for the both of you, the good side of Pierre Dorion, I think, was the actual talent evaluation portion of it, because you look at the scouting process of the players that he was bringing in through the draft. That's the good. You see a lot of this team that's built up of those young guys who he went through the process of evaluating and ultimately deeming worthy of making those first and second, early round picks. And albeit with the lightest scouting staff in the NHL, right? So that was one of those things you're talking about. That's, you have to take that into consideration when you're evaluating a guy like Pierre Dorion, because it's so difficult to do your job just in general, let alone having an owner breathing down your neck and limiting your resources to do your job efficiently, right? But then you look at the other part of, you guys mentioned a few of the misses. I mean, you look at the Matt Duchene trade, and this is going back to Kyle's, affinity for the Swedish trips that they make overseas. I mean, I look at that trade being an outsider and saying that's the type of move that really kind of hamstrings you as a manager, because now you're putting all the pressure on yourself by taking a chance on what was deemed to be a declining player for a up and coming franchise, right? It was going from the Duchene era over to the McKinnon, Landeskog, Rantanen era at that point. So the fact that they made that move and didn't have a protected first round pick, to kind of, isolate them from, any, backlash, that ultimately I think was the start of the end for the Pierre Dorion, love fest that I think everyone was going on up until that point. So the good with the bad is obviously something that a manager has to wear. But that's the part of the job, right? That's why you get paid as well as you do. And ultimately there's some people who can handle it, some people who can't. But as we're talking about this, I mean, obviously, Steve, you've covered the Sens for a long period of time. You were covering them during the great years that they had, where they were making Stanley Cup runs, making the actual Stanley Cup, and just they had iconic players that just not only performed well on the ice, but were iconic in the community. People resonated with those types of players. Not even talking about the Alfredsons, the Spezzas, the Heatleys. We're talking about guys like the Mike Fishers of the world, the Chris Neils of the world. Like, those are the types of players that really you guys have been talking about this entire time of needing to get more of into your lineup to move forward with that. So as you see the roster today, we've talked about some bad contracts. We've talked about some people who you might want to move on from. What does this team need to do in order to take that next step? Do they need to make that big trade where they're moving away from some of these young, talented, potential, star players? or are they just kind of staying pat with who they've got and just kind of bringing in those small pieces here and there to kind of tweak it?
Yeah, that's the $1,000,000 question, because I think you can make a case that, if you let this young group develop further, get them good coaching, break bad habits, you can make an argument that on paper it looks pretty damn good. And so maybe you stick with things. Again, I'm inclined to think that it's time to I'm not saying rip up the core, but really I only have 3 untouchables on this team. I have Brady Tkachuk, Tim Stützle, Jake Sanderson.
Mhm.
I'm open for business on anybody else. I think that right now there are flaws in the roster. I think I mentioned it earlier. I think it comes down to you need more two-way players. You need a little more physical edge, be harder to play against, maybe a new goaltender in there as well. And and veteran leadership would help as well. And maybe, with 3 of those components, you can bring them in the same types of guys. That they've talked about, Tanev in Calgary. There's a guy that he's a leader. He's a veteran. He plays great defense, plays a physical game. These are elements that this team needs in spades. I might even kick the tires on a Blake Coleman, who's 32 years old. If Calgary's, really entertaining a rebuild, maybe that's a guy you bring in. And those are the types of players that I think that the team is missing right now. They have too much soft skill, not enough hard skill. And so I don't think I can, if I'm Steve Staios, I don't think I can continue letting them roll as is and hoping for the best. I think it needs a tweak. And I look at Staios, and you guys talked about it earlier in the show. There's a guy that, when he was a player, he was all of the things that I think the Sens need right now. So in a way, Steve Staios is looking for Steve Staios, or a couple of them, guys who can play with edge, guys who have defense first on their minds, guy who's a veteran. A 30-year-old Steve Staios would help. And a forward version of that would help as well. And to get that, if I have to, I'm probably going to go out and and sacrifice one of the so-called core guys because I think there's a surplus there right now. And you'd probably have some, you probably could give up some first-round draft pick capital right now because there's a good chance that they get, if they move Tarasenko at the deadline, which I think they will. I think that they could get a 2024 first-rounder back. And that would leave the Sens with 3 of those. And so that's more draft capital to try and bring in the things you need.
Yeah. It'll be really interesting to see how management approaches this trade deadline, because you could make a case for any of the 3 options, right? Make a big swing, move out a core player, tinker and kind of move out some of the fringe pieces like a Brandstrom, or you could just kind of stand pat and, hey, you know what? It's a lost season already. Let's see what we can kind of do via the draft this year, because I have to imagine they're not going to punt their Dadonov penalty draft year this season, because hopefully it's a brighter future ahead for them, but we shall see. And then kind of make some moves in the offseason, whether it's via trade or free agency or whatever. I think at the end of the day, though, it really does come down to how are we reinforcing this core with something we don't have? And you look at what is in the system right now. I mean, unless you really truly think that Tyler Boucher is going to be that big, gritty power forward, he's going to be the answer and he's going to be ready within the next year or two, you need to inject some sandpaper there, because Matthew Joseph, nice player, fast skater, but you've got a lot of kind of softer players, not willing to go in and lay the body and muck it up in the dirty areas in front of the net and get under the opposing team's skin, right? It really does come down to kind of Kachuk and Ridley Gregg right now, as far as those mold of players. And you need more than that if you have actual championship aspirations. So I look at someone like a Matt Roy out in LA, who right shot defenseman, going to be a free agent this offseason. Now, whether you choose to try and target him at the trade deadline or kind of roll the dice that whomever goes out there and tries to acquire him won't re-sign him and he becomes a free agent in the summer. But at the end of the day, right, is someone who isn't afraid to lay the body, isn't known to be an offensive defenseman. He's a stay-at-home defenseman, kind of that clear the front of the net, do all the right things in his own end style player. Probably isn't going to break the bank right now. He's at 3.1 million. He's probably getting a pay raise this summer, but I don't think he's jumping up to, $6, $7, $8 million a season. So he is someone that if you can move out some of that back end blue line where I'm kind of the opinion, just based on, I think it was an anonymous like front office survey there, but someone made the comment last off season that Shabbat's contract, they wouldn't touch it with a 100-foot pole, and it kind of riled up some of the Sens fan base. And now, fast forward several months later, they're suddenly going, okay, maybe there's some truth to that statement right there. So I'm kind of the opinion that Shabbat is going to be really tough to move at the deadline. So if there is going to be one of those kind of core pieces moved out, maybe it is more like a Norris type player. But all that being said, you roll out a blue line of, Shabbat, Zub, Sanderson, Chikrin, uh, you know, Matt Roy, and then Tyler Clevin making kind of that next leap. Now, all the excuses of we don't have a good defensive core in front of us, like it's on to the goalies at this point to perform, because I would put that, back end six up there amongst some of the actual league's better ones. And, Clevin taking that next step could be a little bit of the answer to that sandpaper, that gritty defender who's going to put people through the boards and think twice about going into the corners and all of that stuff.
Yeah, and I think the veteran component is another area that I'd look at. I think that the young guys in this team got everything right away. Mm-hmm. They here you go. You've just arrived. Here's all the ice time. Here's all the sweet minutes, and they did so without fully embracing the defensive team tactics or understanding it. One of the two. Mm-hmm. And I think that when you have veteran leadership, and obviously the change from DJ to Jacques and Daniel Offerson coming in, that helps. But I think you need a couple of alpha dogs, those kind of late 20s, early 30s type guys that are in the room, keeping things at an adult level, not allowing emotions to run away with things. And I think that's one of the sins this team has. We always talk about it, whatever the sport is, never get too high, never get too low, stay professional, do your job. And I think this team gets, when they're going well, it's fun-loving, silly time. Let's go get our points. Let's go get our cookies. And when it's not going well, it's the end of the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Insert a couple of alpha dogs who are in their early 30s. And again, I'm not saying Brady Tkachuk's not a great captain. I just think that it was given to him without a few years of insulation and learning on the job from maybe a guy like Mark Stone. I don't know. Maybe you keep him around. That would have been great. But I think that you've got a case to be made where, even if he's not wearing the letter, having a guy come in, maybe we've seen it with Claude Giroux and what he's meant to this team. You could use a little more of that element too.
Yeah. And even just piggybacking off that, right? The Sens have been bad on the road for a while, but 7-14 on the road this year. Only Chicago and San Jose have a worse road record. And a lot of those away games come down to, all right, what are the boys doing when they're not at the rink there, right? So maybe some of that veteran leadership as far as teaching them how to be pros on the road when they're not, going home to their own beds, wouldn't hurt. Let's just say that.
Yeah. And, I think Kyle and I talked about it a couple episodes ago, but taking the model of how the Vancouver Canucks went from such a drastic shift of that we got a young core, we're on the verge of it, but we keep going back to the same type of scenario. Well, now they've actually taken that step forward, and they're the team that they hoped that they'd be, right? When they got all these young pieces together, because to your point, Steve, they brought in a couple of these, alpha dogs who kind of reset that locker room. They got a head coach like Rick Tocchet, who is an alpha dog himself, who reset the the core and reset the energy in that room. So I think that they can look at that type of scenario and say, look, how did they do it? How did they trade away some of the maybe the players we didn't want to get rid of at the time, but have paid dividends for us with the returns that we've got back. So I think that there's a few different things that need to happen here, but all is not lost in the Sens world, because they're close, right? They're close. It's just a matter of it's like gambling, hitting that jackpot at the right time, right? So last thing on the Sens before we can either move on to a couple other things, but I'm curious on this. You guys are obviously dialed in. Who's on your Sens Mount Rushmore?
Oh, are we doing players only, or just in general here? Front office, everything?
Anything.
Oh,
World's your oyster.
I mean, are we talking career longevity too? I mean, Dominik Hasek, if you look at his career, it was amazing, but it certainly wasn't very long in Ottawa, and it didn't go very well with his in terms of best players who ever played. He'd be on it, but I think we're looking at things in terms of people we associate with the Ottawa Senators. Daniel Alfredsson would be my number one. I would then fire Marian Hossa on there as well. I don't know if I've got Chris Phillips on my Mount Rushmore. He's certainly the games played leader, but I never thought of him as like a Norris Trophy candidate or the true dominant, one of the dominant defensemen of his era. Very good defenseman, but I don't know if I have him on the Mount Rushmore per se. Hossa, Alfie, let's fire Zdeno Chara on there, and I'm going to go ahead and slide. Well, no, I'm taking Chara out for Karlsson, and then I'm going to put Brady Tkachuk on there already.
There you go.
There we go. The young captain making his Mount Rushmore debut. I love it.
Boom.
I obviously Alfie has to be there. I think that's a no-brainer.
Yeah. Alexander Daig, Mike Comrie.
Star of a new I think it was on Amazon or Apple, chosen one
Amazon
special.
Yeah.
I haven't watched it yet. It's on my to watch list, but
they sure turned that around quickly, right? I mean, Daig retires, and bam, there's a documentary right there the next day. Where you been? Where you been?
Who needs Chris Pronger, right?
Yeah, I think I would go Alfie. I'll put Brian Murray up there just for what a influence he had on not only when he was with the team here, but even you can still kind of see those little ripples of Brian Murray and the effect that he had on the franchise even after he moved on. So I'll put him up there. I'll go Hossa as well too. And then that fourth one is tough. I would love to put a Senators goalie up there, but we've already beaten that dead horse into the ground there.
I don't think anyone's expecting you to ever have a Sens goalie on your Mount Rushmore, Kyle. It's okay.
I'll put Chris Neil up there just because of how many kind of iconic moments he was a part of, what a huge outsized influence he was in, Battle of Ontario, but also because those who know, and he usually did it in a very quiet way. He wasn't, walking around with a camera crew, but he was very heavily involved and still remains heavily involved in the Ottawa community. Absolutely. So I'll go Neeler for my number 4 spot there.
And you know what? Underrated as far as points or skill goes. He's actually, he just basically tailored his game to what he could do and how he can make the NHL. Like that guy, he told me one time, it's like, because he was a good junior scorer. If you look at his junior stats, they're very good offensively, not just penalty minutes, but he told me, he's like, I just looked at Ottawa's roster on the right side. I saw Alfie, Hossa, Havlat. My scoring days may be done. So he did what he had to do, and I respect him for that.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, and he also retired with fewer career suspensions than Morgan Riley as well, too. So there you go.
There you go. Golf clap for Neeler. There we
go. Well, Steve, we appreciate you hopping on here, but before we let you go, wanted to touch on, obviously, the other big team here in Ottawa from a hockey standpoint, the newly launched PWHL. So they're still waiting on the name to come through. So for now, just the PWHL Ottawa franchise. But what have been your thoughts, and maybe even in talking to some of the people who have attended games and the atmosphere and what those women are doing for the community as well, too? Like, what's your takeaways from the first, I guess, half of the season down at TD Place there?
I'm blown away by the fan reaction, for starters, how they've been supporting it. This isn't, women's hockey didn't start yesterday. And I mean, I was impressed with the investment that was made in this league, that TV is covering it the way they are. It's on YouTube as well. The way the draft was conducted, the whole thing has been first class. And I would say that my biggest pleasant surprise is how fun the hockey is. Obviously, it's not the NHL, but that's a good thing, in my opinion, because the NHL can sometimes get a little dry because it is the best players in the world. They're sublimely coached. Is sublimely a word? Is that an adverb? I'm going to go with it. Sublimely coached. And so there are not that many mistakes. As a result, it sometimes becomes a little robotic and machine-like when everybody's at their best. This is a level, and I'd put it in the kind of the tier 2 junior B ranks. Still amazing hockey, but mistakes are being made, right? And because of the mistakes, you have some furious action. You get some crazy opportunities. It can sometimes be mayhem out there. And I really enjoy the brand of hockey. And so that would be my early impressions of it. Nothing but favorable. And I'm really pleased that because I coached women's hockey or girls hockey right up until midget AA, and I have a real soft spot for it. And I'm glad that it's finally succeeding.
Yeah. And it's great to see such a diverse crowd there as well too, because obviously, right, you want to see these young women having kind of those role models, and hey, look, there's actually a league I can play in that will pay me a livable wage and whatnot, and all of that. But it's also nice to see, I've got multiple people in my networks there where it's like, yeah, me and my buddy are gonna go watch it. So here's two men just going to go and watch the game. So like you're saying, like,
Yeah.
It's an enjoyable brand of hockey. If you haven't had a chance to go out and check out a PWHL game, absolutely go and do it. Talk about affordable as well too, as compared to $35 parking at the CTC and then $15 beers and this, that, the other. Like, it's not going to break the bank, so it's a little bit more of a family friendly atmosphere where you can get the kids out and see some really high level action. And the way that the league is set up, like, teams aren't getting blown out. Like, there's no doormats of the league. Like, these are
Yeah.
competitive games, right? Like, Ottawa right now is in last place in the league, but they're only, I think it was they're two wins, 4 overtime losses, which is heartbreaking, and then 3 losses, 2 of which I know happened in the last 20 seconds, so almost made it to overtime. So even though they're last place in the league right now, they're 3 points behind the final playoff spot with 3 games in hand. So by no means are they out of it. But there's no one that's running away with it that you can say, well, it's a foregone conclusion that Minnesota is going to win the championship or anything like that this year, because even when they do get wins, they're 1-goal games. So
Yeah. And I think you've got a case where that 3 points for the victory is a really exciting component to things, because it can allow for big swings in the standings. Like the other Ottawa team right now is fully out of it, largely because you have that loser point. It's really hard to lose ground or gain ground when you get down to it. But Ottawa is behind the 8 ball a little bit here. But because of the 3 points for a victory, you can make up a ton of ground in a hurry, and that makes for a more exciting season. Gary Bettman's world, on the other hand, he loves the parity of it all. He wants everybody to be exactly the same, and I think this is a neat new way to do it. It might not be big with traditionalists going with a kind of a soccer style point format, but I kind of like it.
Yeah. And the different the different nuances that they bring, so that they brought to the game, obviously are what makes this league unique. And I'm with you, Steve. I mean, the thing that makes it so great in regards to the presentation is the fact that it is different. But as far as Ottawa's recent late game luck goes, we just got to make a big trade for Natalie Spooner. She'll score 4 goals a game. We'll be fine. It'll be fine.
There you go.
Solving all the problems right here.
Yeah, absolutely. Bring Jamie Lee Rattray back to her hometown there, and solve some issues. But that'll be interesting to see, especially because it's a first-year league, right? So our team's really going to want to, quote unquote, move on from players, but like how kind of the trades shape up down the home stretch there for some of these clubs will be just an interesting little thought experiment, just in sports management in general.
Yeah.
And I mean, Ottawa's already making some tweaks as well. I saw early, I guess it'd be mid-February. I'm not sure when you guys are publishing this, but Michaela Mentis Grant, I apologize, I can't remember, but she was the woman who scored the first goal in Ottawa history, we thought, but it went in through the side of the net. But she was a well-regarded player, and they decided to part ways. And so just like the men's team in town, change is afoot right now.
Yeah. No, and again, first season, a lot of firsts for every team, every organization, every person within the organization. So I think the more they get their feet underneath them, the more we'll see a lot of these moves being made, a lot of the understanding of what the long-term scope of an organization is going to look like. So yeah, interesting times ahead. But again, kudos to everybody who's involved in that league, because I don't think it could have gone any better thus far.
Yeah, I think that, and I love that there's young girls who play hockey who are going to the games.
Yes.
That's an absolute, because this isn't the first professional women's league. We've recently had the CWHL.
Yep.
We recently had the NWHL. They didn't work. And now they've got the best players. It's best on best, and everybody seems to have embraced it. And that's great for the league. But honestly, it's also good for the young players as well. It's going to help the development, because one of the things I noticed, and I haven't been coaching girls hockey now for 5 years. And one thing that I noticed was that the girls weren't watching much hockey. And I think that's part of the development process. You look at boys, they're constantly watching the NHL players and the things they do, the dangles, the way they play. They watch it and then they try and replicate it. They watch it and then they try and replicate it on the outdoor rink, at practice, and in games. They express themselves there. Now that we've got young girls who are going to the games, watching professional women's hockey, they've got their idols. Now I think you're going to see that same effect, and I think it's great for development.
Yeah.
Seeing is believing, and for them to be able to kind of see what that next level looks like, and maybe, all right, if I truly have aspirations of playing professionally, like this is kind of where I need to take my game to, is huge. So, Steve, thanks so much for taking some time to sit down with us today, and we appreciate you hopping on the show. Before we let you go, maybe just tell the people who are listening here, if they want to check out any of your stuff, where the best places to find you these days are.
Well, I appreciate that. So we've got, as you mentioned at the top, I do a Sens podcast called the Sens Nation podcast. We get Drake Batherson, who pops on pretty regularly. Greg Kennedy, who was a former men's Carleton University hockey coach. He is my co-host. Got lots of great guests on there and lots of great Sens talk. So I hope you'll check that out at sensnationhockey.com. And you can also find me on the Hockey News. I'm the site editor of the Ottawa Senators site, and that can be found at thn.com/Ottawa. So lots of great Sens articles up there. And I appreciate the opportunity to give those a plug.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, Steve. Again, great insight on the Senators. We've both been a fan of yours for years, and really, again, an honor for us to get you on the podcast. So thanks again.
Golf
anytime.
Golf clap for Steve.
There we go.
Thank you.
Well, great having Steve Warne join us there. But before we completely sign off from the podcast, I hear we have a bit of a celebrity in our midst, and it's not yours truly. So Mr. Kirkwood is going Hollywood on us here. You want to tell the folks about that special project you've been working on, burning the midnight oil lately?
I mean, Hollywood is a very generous term, but no, it's
Stitz Vegas?
Stitz Vegas. Yeah, one and the same.
Yeah.
But no, I just wanted to talk about, had the great opportunity to recently work on a film for the Lifetime Network, one that was filmed in Ottawa, actually.
And that's not the Hallmark Channel, which I made the initial error on. So it's not a Christmas movie.
No. But again, this it's first time kind of delving into the film world and kind of understanding the whole nuance of it. But essentially, my role, high school movie. It involves the high school football team. So
you played a high schooler.
I played a high schooler, yeah. I believe my official title in the movie was actually football coach number 2. So again, being a background actor, but mostly consulted on the actual football, with choreographing a lot of the different scenes based on the script, and working with some very talented actors, and yeah. So anyways,
so what did football coach number 1 bring to the table that he got billed ahead of you then?
Well, he's been an actor for over 20 years, so I think he's got a couple of different experience points on me there. This is the Hollywood bias coming into play all over again. But no, but again, great. It was a great experience. Was able to kind of take in what it was like to be kind of on the other side of it. But it was filmed at Earl of March High School in Canada, which again was kind of unique. Saying that a lot of people who were working on the movie went to that high school, so they're able to say, this is where this is where that is. again, getting to know a lot of the actors was great. They're fantastic. Understanding everything that they have to do is really, puts a different respect on on the whole film industry in general. But actually had a local team that I brought out that was kind of the background football players to make it look as authentic as possible. So shout out to the Gatineau Vikings.
Hey.
So just want to give them a little golf clap. But yeah, it was fun. But March 16th will be the release date on the Lifetime channel. The title of the movie is now called, they changed it a couple times, but A Friday Night Sex Scandal. So looking, yeah.
Oh, you're getting risque with your theatrical debut here, eh?
Again, it wasn't called that when I first went in to do it, but yeah, I guess they changed the name of it post production, and which I heard is quite a frequent thing that happens. But no, it was a lot of fun. Looking forward to just seeing it come out, and won't give away too much of kind of what happens with the plot and everything. But it's more of, it's not your typical Lifetime movie, more of a heavier drama, style of movie. But yeah, if anyone wants to check it out, it will be available on the premiere March 16th, I believe, at 7 p.m. Eastern time. On the Lifetime channel. So
when are we hosting the 1867 red carpet edition viewing party of this is what the people really want to know.
It's funny, we're actually going to be doing a streaming at the house, so obviously you and the wife are welcome to come by for that. And maybe we'll do a post movie breakdown 1867 episode based on yours and my critique, because I haven't seen it yet. I haven't seen it post edit, so I'm anxious to see what that looks like. But yeah, we'll give it the gears, so to speak.
Well, there we go. Shout out to hair and makeup for making you screen worthy to get out there for a wider audience there.
Yeah, honestly, it's I've definitely got more of a face for radio. So the fact that I was able to be presentable and again, just represent the football community with the movie, and hopefully it comes off as authentic as I hope it's going to look, because yeah, put a lot of good hard work in with the players and with the actors, and yeah, couldn't have asked for a better experience. So hopefully it comes out well in on the screen.
There we go. March 16th. Mark your calendars for Kirkwood's big theatrical debut.
Absolutely. You know what? This is going to be the breakout. I know 5 years in the future, I'm going to be sitting in my house in Hollywood. I'm going to say
polishing your Oscars.
Polishing the Oscars. It all started back in 2023. And yeah, anyways, but again, looking forward to it. And yeah, we'll see where things go from there.